into public history, so that so that's kind of why I was hired, really, was to provide more deliberate training in public history fields.
There's been a couple actions already through there.
You work closely with the Center for Western Studies.
Yeah.
They already did like Harris-Armstrong. There's no women in Harris-Armstrong.
Isn't that just delicious?
Hey, Zach, are you ready?
Yeah.
And thank you, Foundation, for seeing our news today. That was very nice.
You need a water.
At this time, I would like to introduce Will Wright and Zach Harris. And I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. But they have a very interesting project that involves Emmett and Jack Armstrong, who were contemporaries of Dorothy Day Davenport. And then they'll have some information about a part of history in Sioux Falls that most of you don't know.
Well, thank you everyone for inviting us to. All right, can everyone hear me okay? All right, thank you for inviting us. I'm Will Wright. I'm a history professor at Augustana University, and I'm joined with Zach Harris Jr., who is president and curator of the South Dakota African American History Museum. And today, our talk is entitled Emma and Jack Armstrong and African American Heritage in Sioux Falls. And today we're excited to share really how the history of the Mary Chilton chapter is actually intertwined with the history of the African American community in Sioux Falls. And Zach and I started working together a few years ago in some historic preservation projects. And what we found when we reached out to the South Dakota State Historic Preservation Office is that really African American history is very underrepresented on the National Register of Historic Places. According to their office, there are only 6 sites associated with the Black experience, such as Allen Chapel, which was associated with the AME Church in Yankton. And so we've been trying to work on bringing greater visibility to African American landmarks and heritage sites because they stretch back to territorial days.
African Americans have proven their devout patriotism to our nation time and time again, with ancestors from the diaspora serving in every single American war that they were allowed to serve in. Take, for instance, our American Revolutionary War. There were thousands of African Americans, Black patriots, who sided with colonists and opposed British rule. It's documented that African Americans served in the Continental Army and Patriot militias during the Revolutionary War. The picture you're viewing is of the Andersons. This is a Black patriotic military family with 4 generations of dedicated servicemen and women that have served in every war in the 20th century. Kenny Anderson Jr., the first Black city councilor in Sioux Falls, whose father, Kenny Anderson Sr., the first Black city commissioner in South Dakota, are common examples of African American families that proudly served in the U.S. Armed Forces and also became influential leaders in the community. The military provided specialized skills that oftentimes carried over into civilian life. The Army Air Force Technical School helped some African Americans find higher paying employment post their military careers. The history of African Americans serving in the American military covers the War of 1880. Oh, I'm sorry. One more.
So the Army Air Force Technical School, located on what is today Joe Foss Field, began as a training ground to keep airplanes operational. So just as pilots during World War II would go to flight school, mechanics and other technicians would go to these places to learn trade skills in plane maintenance to basically keep them in fighting shape. And so beginning in 1943, at least 300 African-American servicemen and their family arrived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota to train there. And one of those was the private Jack Armstrong.
In the small Georgia town of McDonough, Jack Armstrong was born around 1914, and his wife Emma Harris was born in 1916. McDonough was a close-knit town with a population hovering a little over 1,000 people between the 1910s and the 1940s. Jack and Emma, they knew each other very well since their younger days. The two got married. Jack's career in the Army as a plane mechanic, led the newly wedded wife Emma away from Georgia and onto military bases in Mississippi, Kansas, and Iowa during World War II, before they ended up moving to South Dakota in 1945 and settled in Minnehaha County. Jack and Emma did not have children of their own, so they adopted her nephews Bob and Ernie Harris from McDonough, raising the two boys right here in Sioux Falls. On one particular day, Private John Jack Armstrong, still new to South Dakota, finished a long, exhausting shift of physical training at Joe Foss Field. That night, he wanted to relax, have dinner, and hang out with friends. His commander, Captain J.E. Shannon, told him and all the other African-American servicemen that they could only eat at two establishments in the area. That was either the Canton Cafe or the Hamburger Inn. That's it. Armstrong recalled, I thought I'd come to a place where they respected black soldiers. See, he was used to the Jim Crow prohibitions down south, but the Georgia native was shocked to find racial segregation existed up here in the north. The mayor and city commissioners worried an influx of African Americans will create social tensions. Due to this perceived racial divide, black servicemen and their families needed a space for black newcomers in their community. With the help of a Jewish business owner named Ben Margulies, the Black United Service Organization Center, or the Black USO Center, will become just the space the community was looking for. Ben Margulies was a World War I veteran with little formal education, but a really huge heart for community and helping others. Margulies was involved in the Sioux Falls Jewish Welfare Fund, the Sioux Valley Hospital Society, ACLU, and the Sioux Falls chapter of the NAACP, among many other political, charitable, and or Jewish religious causes. For much of his career, Margulies owned an auto accessory store and managed real estate. His real estate portfolio included businesses and residential properties. One particular property was what you see right here, 115 North Dakota Avenue, which Margulies offered to the African American community to be the Black USO Center. You go to the next slide. The first floor of the Black USO Center provided recreational activities, jazz concerts, game nights, and performances from singers or comedians. The image on the left here shows the Black U.S. Army Air Corps soldiers in Sioux Falls at the Black USO Center in 1943, being celebrated and welcomed by a jazz band as they newly arrived in Sioux Falls. Included in this image is Staff Sergeant Eugene Wiltshire, who was the husband of Charlotte Anderson, going back to the Anderson family, that military family we talked about. The property helped African American community as it supported mothers with newborn children and provided a space for soldiers to relax and socialize. Emma and Jack lived in the upstairs apartment above it. So they essentially met and got to know every black person that passed through Sioux Falls. They also met and became acquainted with influential white people in town.
And so this is where the story of Dorothy Day Davenport and Emma Armstrong come together. So you all are probably aware a little bit of this story, right? That the Argus Leader newspaper began in Sioux Falls in 1895, and from 1896 until his death in 1945, the lead editor and part owner of that newspaper was Dorothy's father, Charles M. Day. Charles' son, Herbert Day, took over as president from 1945 until his death in 1954, when Dorothy became president of the newspaper. And you obviously see her business card here. Dorothy remembered that she really became her father's confidant, his co-equal, and remembered that, quote, In my childhood, newspaper problems were discussed with me and not around me. Her father also imparted that people, like newspapers, should be treated with fairly and compassionately. She remembered, quote, "How shocked I was on occasion when my father informed me that he could not honorably protect me from unfavorable publicity if I ever should merit it. From the thought of that, a true sense of fair play began to grow." Dorothy married attorney Holton Davenport, who co-founded the law firm Davenport Evans in 1939. And so the two really represented a power couple. We know that Emma Armstrong was very close to the Davenport family. She worked as a personal secretary and attendant for Dorothy. And after Holton's death, she served as a caregiver for Dorothy Day Davenport in her old age. The last will and testament for both Holton in 1966 and for Dorothy in 1980, which is sort of origins of the foundation, list Armstrong as one of the beneficiaries of their estate. And so we know that Dorothy and Emma were close and important with one another, and so the question becomes, you know, how did they meet? How did they get to know one another? Thanks. That's good. Well, Dorothy really felt that the success of the Argus Leader was intersected with the success of Sioux Falls, and so she became a very civic-minded community leader who wanted the city to be a welcoming place for all. This included things like co-founding the local chapter of DAR here, but Dorothy also served as the board member of the Black USO Center and of the Booker T. Washington Service Center. And so we actually see articles here. It's sort of hard to see in the bottom. So those jazz musicians that were brought in, that was the work of Dorothy Day Davenport. So they're bringing that in and other sort of entertainment as a board member. And so it's through Dorothy's work with the Black USO Center that she met Emma Armstrong.
As the Booker T. Washington Service Center was establishing its presence as a comfortable, welcoming space for Black folks in Sioux Falls, much like newly arrived African Americans, the Service Center took some time to get settled. It was housed in 4 different buildings and locations over the years until 1948, when Charles Warden supplied his property at 702 East 6th Street as the final service center facility for African American social gatherings, singing parties, discussion circles, committee meetings, and more, and that lasted through 1957. Throughout the time that it was open, the service center, with its 9 rooms and 5 bedrooms, doubled as transitional housing for Black newcomers, where they could stay while searching for their own residence. 10 to 15 people could be accommodated on rollaway beds each night. During the summer of 1954, the service center housed Black visitors from 44 different states across the U.S., demonstrating its national significance.
So the Booker T. Washington Center was started back in 1926 by a couple, Louisa and Harvey Mitchell. The couple was originally from Illinois and moved to Sioux Falls in 1906. They were a beautician barber duo. And there's a picture of Louisa Mitchell there. Because of the reputation as a hairdresser that Louisa was able to establish, she was actually invited to open up a beauty school in downtown Sioux Falls on Phillips Avenue in the Shriver Johnson building. You can actually see a little bit of public art on Sioux Falls right next to Minerva's that is sort of an ode to her. Well, she worked in that building just across from there. And so she, in the building of clientele and the building of students, she launched in 1909 what was called the California School of Beauty that trained Black and white women in the trade as hairdressers. They often took in boarders from people from near and far, so we know that from census records that the Mitchells had young women from Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, Mississippi, who all would stay with them and train at the California School of Beauty. By 1935, Mitchell was teaching the trade to 12 Black operators and 4 white operators at the time. The 1935 edition of the Crisis magazine, which was the national outlet for the NAACP, called Louisa Mitchell's California School of Beauty, quote, the best equipped beauty parlor between Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Seattle, Washington. And so Black travelers who had trouble finding accommodations would often come to the Mitchells to see where they could stay.
As African Americans found success around the nation, word spread back to the communities, and Blacks began traveling more and more, but everywhere they went, it was not always friendly. So the Green Book picture to the left here was a resource used by African American travelers with a guide to places they can stop, restaurants, hotels, service stations, without any fear of racial prejudice or any harassment. In Sioux Falls, 2 places were listed: Mrs. J. Moxley at 915 North Main Avenue, and the Booker T. Washington Service Center, which Dorothy Day Davenport was board director of. Maurice Coakley, who was a prominent voice for civil rights in Sioux Falls, and a figure we'll highlight momentarily, stayed at the Service Center during his last 2 years of graduating from Washington High School. He was living at the Service Center due to his parents' marital problems. In addition to housing, the Service Center was also an important social and recreational space. Each week, Sunday school and choir practices were held in cooperation with St. John's Baptist Church. Community members were always welcome over for bridge games, birthday parties, or even just meetings. It also was not uncommon to find political meetings with keynote speakers being hosted there. The Sioux Falls chapter of the NAACP held their meetings in the main room, as did social groups like the Colored Women's Federated Club and the Bronx Women's Club. When the South Dakota Education Association held its annual conferences in Sioux Falls, the Service Center served as a sort of headquarters for Black educators. Emma and Jack Armstrong, along with Dorothy Day Davenport as a board member of board of director, all had ties and crossed paths oftenly due to their work with the Black USO Center and Booker T. Washington Service Center. Mrs. Davenport helped Emma engage in more community involvement and introduced her to social circles that she may not have had privilege or connection to otherwise during segregation in the Jim Crow era. Being from a southern state like Georgia, where wildlife and crops were abundant, Emma and Jack were avid outdoors people. Coming to South Dakota, they thrived out in nature. Emma and Jack's love for the fresh outdoors, along with their enjoyment of fishing and hunting, including outdoor recreational pastimes like pheasant hunting, helped foster even deeper bonds between the Davenports and the Armstrongs, as South Dakota pheasant hunting season always drew interest in large crowds from Black and white communities alike, far and wide. The Armstrongs were also people of faith and were longtime members of St. John's Baptist Church.
So St. John's origin as a congregation actually starts in 1917 in Sioux Falls, when a group of Black teenagers requested that the congregation be formed. They found a permanent space when they purchased a former Jewish synagogue in 1930. This was located on Minnesota Avenue. It's the present-day location of Van Nuys Park. And it's really through there that the church became the social epicenter for the African American community in Sioux Falls. You can see the church membership here in 1940. And so when Jack and Emma arrived, this is one of the first places that they became connected with. And it's no doubt that the Black USO Center for its first few months was actually housed in the basement of St. John's Baptist Church before it moved to the place provided by Margulies.
The area surrounding Van Nuys Park has strong cultural significance to the African community of Minnehaha and Lincoln County. In 1961, civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. traveled to Sioux Falls to speak at the downtown Knife and Fork Club about the Southern movement to end Jim Crow segregation. Beforehand, he spoke to a small gathering of African Americans at St. John's Baptist, including Emma Armstrong, which is pictured right there on the left next to Martin Luther King. The Mary Chilton chapter of Daughters of American Revolution sponsored the MLK sign at Van Nuys Park in Sioux Falls on January 20th, 2020. Another reason for MLK's visit was the continued fight for African Americans to have equal rights in the U.S., rights such as voting without any worry of poll taxes that some citizens may have not been able to afford.
And so the civil rights movement was really a national phenomenon, not regional, tied to the South. An example of this is in South Dakota. The national NAACP chapter called on longtime black leader Ted Blakey of Yankton to form a committee to push the state legislature to ratify the 24th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which banned poll taxes in federal elections. And so Blakey invited other prominent African Americans, including Maurice Coakley, that would then lobby the state legislature to ratify it. And so on January 23rd, 1964, the state legislature voted to approve the 24th Amendment. And South Dakota is very significant in that it was the final state needed to reach that 3/4 threshold to be a constitutional amendment. Following the success of this campaign in 1967, Coakley and Blakey were asked to establish a statewide chapter of the NAACP in South Dakota. Coakley's participation in civil rights was predicated on the social and economic stability that he obtained from the Sioux Falls community. But it wasn't just voting. Housing was also an issue for civil rights struggles. And it made it difficult for people of color to receive mortgages due to redlining that was common practice in many cities across the United States. And so this often kept black families confined to the northeast ends of town until the Coakleys.
Maurice Coakley was employed by Minner and Lizzie Greer, an African-American family who owned and operated an auto repair garage. After earning his high school diploma from Washington, he worked at the stockyards sorting cattle, pigs, and sheep for meat processing at John Morrell and Company. Maurice spent 4 years working as a federal meat inspector until he decided to start his own business called Coakley Porter Service right here in Sioux Falls. On December 22nd, 1935, he married Clarice Sharif of Mason City, Iowa, who had training as a hairdresser at Louisa Mitchell's California School of Beauty. They have 4 boys, as you can see here in the photo: Maurice Jr., Eugene, Edward, and Daniel. 26th Street racial barrier was broken in the 1950s by 3 families. The Coakleys here, Maurice and Clarice Coakley and their kids, Theodore and Bessie Vaughn, and Alfred and Bertha White. To live below 26th Street, these families had to confront restrictions with brazen assurance by demonstrating their strength of character, work ethic, sacrifice for family, and trust to their white friends, employers, and allies to help convey on their behalf as an emissary of sorts to assist in them getting deeds of properties in their names. For example, Alfred and Bertha White rented at 115 North Dakota Avenue, the Black USO Center. Alfred worked at Bob Anderson's Modern Shoe Hospital, saving money to purchase a home. In 1954, he put up an offer on 1808 South Menlo Avenue, but was rejected because local residents objected to having a black family in the neighborhood. Alfred's employer, Bob Anderson, a white man, spoke with the surrounding neighbors, who let their guard down when the white businessman testified to Alfred's upstanding character, and only then was Alfred and Bertha able to buy their home.
The Armstrongs also moved from that 14-unit apartment complex at 115 North Dakota Avenue, where many African-American newcomers from Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina had resided, to eventually buy a home at 219 West Lotta in 1960. And you can see a historic and contemporary photo of this property. Their house purchase represents a larger trend in which black families broke this de facto racial barrier by buying homes outside of the historically black north end of town. To secure a mortgage, the Armstrongs relied on Dorothy Day Davenport, actually brought her into the bank to testify about their ability to pay on the loan. And then 2 blocks down the street of West Lotta, Jack was able to open an automobile garage.
Transferring skills in the military as a plane mechanic, Jack was employed at Billion Automotive as a mechanic and car repairman. With his skills in hustling, entrepreneurial spirit, he ended up opening his own body shop on West Lotta, not far from their home, as Will just stated. Jack and Emma attended Pilgrim Baptist Church. Emma was a mother of the church, and Jack was a deacon, who eventually almost became the pastor. Jack was not a man who sat idle. He made and sold handheld church fans for his congregation, which you can see an example there, and was inspired by the first black radio station in America, WERD, which was based in his home state of Georgia. So he hosted not 1, but 2 gospel radio shows in South Dakota that featured discussions with ministers and played gospel music. Jack was a patriotic, spiritual family man who instilled those same principles into his adopted sons, Ernie and Bob Harris. After a perfect attendance at Washington High School, Ernie followed his adopted father's footsteps and joined the U.S. Army, where he served a tour in Vietnam. He was honorably discharged in Texas, then returned to Sioux Falls to begin his career as a chef. Ernie's younger brother Bob also followed the family legacy and served a tour in Vietnam, returning to Sioux Falls to become a successful small business owner and active member of the community, playing a key role in establishing the South Dakota African American History Museum along with Port Williams. Ernie and Bob Harris were both members of Friendship Baptist Church, where Bob would go on to become a deacon, so you can say, like father, like son. Next slide. This picture of Emma Armstrong was on Mother's Day at Mount Olive Church in Snellville, Georgia, about 30 minutes east of Atlanta in 2018. This was her home church as a child, and when she moved back to Georgia, she continued to attend there. She was 101 at the time this photo was taken. Phyllis Shelton, the daughter of Alfred and Bertha White, provided this photo. And Phyllis said, "I visited Sioux Falls in 2011 and Emma was still active in church. She was dressed to impress with her lovely hats that matched her outfits perfectly, as always. I miss her. I always enjoyed talking with her. I think she moved to Georgia before her nephew Bob Harris moved back to Georgia. May they both rest in peace." Born in 1916, Emma transitioned honorably into the role of an ancestor on January 13, 2019, at the age of 102. Local artist, sculptor, activist Porter Williams said he saw Emma as the kind of mother that all the black kids wanted or wished they had. She was a peaceful and loving woman with a very kind spirit about her.
And so the question is sort of where do we go from here? One of the things that Zach and I have been working on is trying to process the collection of Alfred White Sr. So many of the photographs that you saw today of Jack and Emma Armstrong were provided by Alfred White Sr. He's the one holding the camera with MLK. He was a videographer and photographer and really a documentarian that shows kind of the multiracial society in Sioux Falls from 1945 when he arrived here until the 1990s. And his children, Al Jr., Carolyn, and Phyllis, have recently donated dozens of reels of unprocessed film and thousands of slides of photographs from the 1940s through the 1990s to the Siouxlands Heritage Museum at the Irene Hall Resource Center. And so we'd like to better process and digitize that collections because it will help to further shed light on this story. The other thing that we'd like to do is in 2024 we finished a preliminary context study of African American heritage sites in Sioux Falls. And there are some places that we think merit further research and documentation for National Register of Historic Places, including places like the Coakley Home, the Armstrong Home, and the Booker T. Washington Center, which are existing properties here in Sioux Falls. And so we want to make sure that these African American landmarks are preserved because they tell not only the story of the African American community, but also, interesting enough, the story of Dorothy Day Davenport. So, thank you.
So in the spirit of Dorothy Day Davenport, knowing that these still exist, WWDDDD, what would Dorothy Day Davenport do?
Fascinating, wasn't it? Yeah. I just want to say thank you. And yes, I believe they're gonna apply for a grant.
You gotta have.
So Will and Zach, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or if you have things that you'd rather do, want to duck away, that's perfectly acceptable as well. But thank you so much for that. So with that in mind, by virtue of the authority vested in me as regent of the Mary Chilton chapter and the National Society Daughters of American Revolution, I now declare this meeting in session.